Hello, everybody. I'm Jackie K. Cooper, and I am here with James Rollins. And we are so excited that we're going to have an hour of conversation and get to know this man. And most of you know his work, but we're going to go into that also. So, Jim, thank you for being here tonight.
No, thank you, Jackie. I appreciate the willingness to put me on the hot seat and pose embarrassing questions to me for an hour.
Oh, I try to stay away from the embarrassing, but I do want to jump right in because this right here is your book, Kingdom of Bones. I read it. I've never had a book pull me through it as quickly as this one did. It's amazing.
Well, thank you very much.
I'm telling you, it's there's no preamble. It is.
No, I mean, I like to just throw people right into the deep end right from the start, and just basically keep that train rolling all the way to the end.
Well, you do, because just when you think you've reached a respite or whatever, no, something else comes up, and you've got a story going here and a story going there and a story going over there, and they're all edge of your seat situations. So what is your writing process like? Do these ideas just come to you, or read something?
I'm always looking for two things, basically. I'm looking for a historical mystery, a piece of history that ends in a question mark, something I can solve within the pages of a novel. And then I'm looking for a bit of science that makes you go, what if, where's that headed? How might that, challenge us? And I just collect them. I've got these file folders. I don't know if you can see them right over here, those little stainless steel file folders right there. Mm-hmm. I just collect these little tidbits of ideas, and then I try to keep them from overwhelming me. I try to keep them to just that area of my office. It's too easy because I subscribe to like 23 different magazines in print and digital format. I keep throwing ideas in there, and so I just have to occasionally weed through them, get rid of ideas that either no longer interest me, or maybe another author has tackled that subject matter. Then I can throw them out. And then what happens, though, is that bit of serendipity, that bit of magic, where either as I'm sifting through there, I will discover a piece of history that I've forgotten about, a piece of science that I've forgotten about. But because they end up in my hand at the same time, or maybe even on the floor next to each other at the same time, only then do I begin to see, oh, those two jigsaw puzzle pieces might fit together. And then I'll do some research and I'll realize, nope, I'm wrong. They don't fit together at all. Then I can throw them away or put them back in the box. But occasionally then they will build into the story. It'll snowball. And then I know that's a story I can tell. So that's basically my thumbnail version of my process, is just gathering ideas and trying to find those jigsaw puzzles that fit together.
Well, when did you start on Kingdom of Bones?
That's a good question. I mentioned I'm always looking for history and science. Well, the science that came out of those folders over there was an article I pulled out in early 2019. It was an article from New Scientist magazine, and the title of the article was, "When is the next global pandemic due to hit?" Which was thought was a fairly prophetic novel, it was a prophetic article rather. But I wasn't really interested so much in the pandemic quality of that scientific article. It was because I'd already done pandemic novels. I'd done The Sixth Extinction and The Seventh Plague, which both had a pandemic quality to them. So I didn't really want to do another pandemic novel. But what interested me in that story was the article talked about these virus hunters. These are brave men and women that go out into the field, both in the remote corners of the world, sampling the wildlife, looking basically for that next pandemic pathogen that might threaten the globe. And I was really fascinated by that type of character. I thought, well, maybe I could put a virus hunter in a novel. But what intrigued me especially was that most virus hunters out there are wildlife veterinarians. And being that is my own original profession, veterinarian, that was especially intriguing to me.
Yeah,
so I began putting this together. Exactly. So I was, just thought, well, cool, I'm going to shine a light on them. And so I found a piece of history that matched that, began building the story. I pitched my idea middle to late 2019 to my editor. She said, yeah, it's a cool story idea, run with it. So I began writing it. And it's about 3/4 of the way through that novel when March 2020 happened, when COVID appeared, and all of a sudden I get a call from my editor saying, "Hey Jim, did those virologists that you were speaking to for research back in 2019, did they warn you about what was going to happen in 2020?" And unfortunately, no, they did not. But what they were telling me was pretty scary stuff, both before the pandemic and also during the first months of the pandemic. Because what I was hearing in the public sphere from government officials, from public health officials, was very different from what I was hearing from the virologists. Those that were willing to speak to me during that period of time. And they were telling me, some shocking details, things, behind the curtain type of things that's going on in virology that most people weren't being alerted to or aware of. So I had a moment of sort of a moral dilemma in March 2020. I thought, well, maybe I better shelve this book, even though I'm 3/4 of the way done it, because I don't know if I should be publishing basically sort of a popcorn entertainment type of book, this big roller coaster of a jungle adventure, in a period of time when you have nurses and doctors on the front lines battling COVID, you have family members losing members to this virus. And so I thought, is it disrespectful for me to publish such a novel during this time? But at the same time, I'm hearing all this information that I'm not hearing being given out to the public that I'm learning from the virologist. So I thought I'm going to take some of this that I'm learning from them and fold this into the novel. I think it was important to learn. So I continued forward with it. And the book was supposed to come out last summer, but because of a variant outbreak, they shifted me to December. But then Omicron came out, so they shifted me to April. So originally, I got suspicious that maybe it was my pub date that was stimulating the variants from rising up. As soon as my pub date changed, a new variant would arise to try to knock me somewhere else. So I'm glad, at least in April, things seem to be somewhat calming down. Hopefully, knock on wood, if there's wood right over here, I'm going to knock on that right now.
Yes.
That we're seeing the tail end of all this. It was fun going on my book tour last week, doing in-person events, which was new to see people that were able to go out and join me at book events, and it was a great deal of fun to have that versus what we're doing today. Doing these virtual events is fun. You reach a wider audience, but at the same time, it's not that personal interaction you get from being in a room with people that are enthusiastic reading, enthusiastic about your books. So it was a great deal of fun last week to be able to travel and meet everybody.
It was a horrible time for everybody, but I hear from so many authors about, this thing of suddenly you can't have a book tour. You can't get out there, like you say, and meet the people and communicate, was just a horrible side effect of everything that was going on. But when you had your book, when you submitted it, did your publisher or your editor or whoever it is, did anybody try to say, well, you need to tamper this down or you need to build this up based on the climate that we're in?
No, when I usually get my they definitely didn't pull the reins out on anything. I've been with the same editor since my very first book. Back it was published in 1997. So I've been with Lissa, my editor, for close to 30 years now. Yeah, which for the publishing industry, having the same editor through such a span of time is quite rare. And so again, she didn't put any blinders or reins on me about what I can tell or shouldn't tell in the story. But I remember getting the line edited manuscript back from Lissa, and usually there's like little feathers of post-it notes about things that she's can you make this clear, or maybe you can punch this up. But a lot of it was like OMG, in the part of it, but some of the stuff that I was revealing about viruses that even she, who has a fairly strong scientific background, was not aware of. So there's sort of fun stuff in the book that fun and scary stuff in the book about viruses.
No,
so
that's scary.
But I think it's important not only. Exactly. I think we shine a little bit of a light on our current pandemic, but also more importantly, maybe give some insight on what we're doing, the lessons we've learned from this pandemic, so that hopefully, I shouldn't say if, because most likely it's going to be when another organism arises like this, that we'll be able to better handle it. If we had been able to get a handle on COVID, months prior to the, when people began to address it, we could have saved, hundreds of thousands of lives. So, what this novel reveals is the efforts that are going on behind the scenes to try to identify those pandemic pathogens, to get a jump on that so that we can stamp it out earlier, or at least get a heads up quicker so that we can avoid the catastrophe that we've experienced over the last 2 years.
Yeah, I was just, as you were talking, I was reflecting back on the book, and I was thinking in the first 100 pages, probably the first 50 pages, you have like every plague out of the Bible. You've got crazy faith, you've got killer ants, you've got torrential rain. I mean, it's just like, what next? And
Well, I mean, that's my goal. My goal is to entertain. It's my goal is to keep people turning pages late into the night. Beads of sweat on your forehead a little bit, great. Uh, but I'm hoping that during the course of that roller coaster ride, that you're going to learn something. At the end of all my books, I have a what's true, what's not section where I sort of pull aside the curtain and reveal how much of the book is based on fact and how much is my own imagination. And then hopefully, if there's anything that interests you in the subjects raised, whether it's the history or the science, that I'm going to leave you some breadcrumbs to pick up and follow. Because to me, one of the greatest compliments I get as a writer is when someone says, "Hey, I enjoyed your book, but I was really interested in this part of the story, and I saw what you left at those notes you left at the end of the book. Either I ordered that book that you recommended, or I went online and looked at that subject matter you raised, or that link you left. So then I know the book worked more than just popcorn entertainment; that it had some deeper resonance. So then I know the book worked on multiple levels."
now this is it Sigma Force? This is
Yep.
series of books, but
Number
standalone.
16.
But
Yeah, it's a
you
16th
can read the whole
book, but
series, or you can read each one
yeah,
individually.
exactly. I mean, I like whenever I was encountering series that I wasn't required to go back from the beginning and carry forward to really understand the story. I like series where you can jump in anywhere. And so when I was crafting the series, I wanted to make sure that every novel was welcoming to a new reader, so that whatever backstory or information you need to understand the story, I'm going to give you, so that if you're interested in this book, just jump right in. So I always jokingly say I'm probably the only person that's actually read my series in order besides my editor. Most people just find the book in an airport bookstore or at your local library, and then the cover might be, maybe the cover interests them, maybe the jacket copy interests them. They pick it up and they read it, and they hope that they like it. They'll go and backfill the remaining books.
Well, it's hard enough to write an engrossing plot, an action adventure, bring in the scientific information like you do, but you've got possibly 8, 9 distinct individual characters that you have to keep each one in their lane and in their mind.
It requires a lot
fascinating.
of post-it notes and a cork board where I can stick notes to keep trails on different characters. But I like doing stories that have ensemble characters rather than. I've made this comment before that if you look at all my early books, the books that Lissa was editing early on in my career, they were standalone adventures. They were individual cast of characters. They had no relation to each other. And I was getting a lot of pressure from the publishing house to do a series. And I didn't really want to do a series because of what I call the Jessica Fletcher syndrome. Jessica Fletcher from Murder, She Wrote. Here's a woman from Cabot Cove that was always stumbling over dead bodies. I've never stumbled over a dead body. So eventually you begin to wonder, what's wrong with that woman? Why is she always stumbling over dead bodies? So your suspension of disbelief becomes a little strained. Like, what's wrong with that woman? And also, it's hard to maintain jeopardy in a series character, because if somebody pulls a gun on Jessica Fletcher in an episode, that trigger's never going to be pulled because she's in next week's episode. So you can't really, there's no real sense of threat involved. So I didn't really want to do that until I wrote a book called Sandstorm, where I, for the first time, introduced Sigma Force. And they're not the main characters of that book. They were sort of the support characters for the main cast of characters. But I like the concept of Sigma Force. And Sigma Force are these group of special forces soldiers that were drummed out of the service for various reasons. But because of special aptitude or skills, they're secretly recruited by DARPA, the Defense Department's Research and Development Agency. They were each retrained in different scientific disciplines to basically go out and protect the world against various sort of emerging technological threats. As I jokingly say, they're basically scientists with guns. And I like that idea of building a series around a team rather than an individual, an ensemble cast of characters instead of one character. Because that way the threat can come from many different directions, so you don't strain that credibility. Everybody's in jeopardy because I can knock off a major player in Sigma Force because Sigma Force can always recruit a new member. So no one's necessarily completely safe in the Sigma universe. So I can maintain the level of jeopardy. So once I got past that to work as a workaround for the Jessica Fletcher syndrome, I was ready to begin the Sigma Force series. And again, 16 books later, I'm still going strong, and I see no end in sight at this point.
Now, you've done 16 of these, you said. Has that been
Correct.
your writing career since the first one, or did you interject standalone other books into the
Yeah, I mean, generally throughout my career, I've done 2 books a year, mostly every year, two books a year, and it's always been a Sigma Force, at least for the last 16 years, a Sigma Force book and something else.
I got
And
you.
so I've used that second half of my year to try something different, to either do a standalone occasionally, to branch off into something that maybe is a little bit off brand. Like just in January, I had the first book in the fantasy series that came out. I've also dabbled a little bit with a gothic horror with a co-written series with Rebecca Cantrell for my second book of the year. So I like doing something else because I've always found that if I did a Sigma Force book after Sigma Force book, the staccato pace thriller after staccato pace thriller, I might get a little bored with it. I find that once I go somewhere else for a while, I'm anxious to get back to Sigma Force, and readers have good noses on them. They can almost sense when a writer is bored with their own material or is just going through the motions. And I'm always secretly fearful of that ever being the sense from my writing. So one way to keep myself fresh is by doing something different, to alternate between Sigma and something else, then returning to Sigma. Because by the time I'm done that other book, I'm anxious to get back to those characters. I miss them. Can't wait to get back in the trenches with them. So hopefully that keeps a level of passion and excitement that's sort of can be infused into the page that the reader will sense.
Well, while I was doing my research for this tonight, I was looking to see if there were any movies, and I found like two that were in production or map something.
Yeah, at this point, everything gets nibbled by Hollywood. Hollywood has a tendency to throw a lot of stuff around. But about 9 months ago, the entire Sigma Force universe, every book, every short story, were all optioned en masse by a studio production house that wants to maybe do like a series based on like a streaming series based on the characters. So at this point, we're still in the early stages. We'll hopefully hear something in the next 6 months to a year, whether that gets greenlit and gets forward. So
Well, I mean, I could totally see those characters being in a streaming series. I mean, there's I
I'm
don't
all
know if
for it. I think it'd be fun too.
I don't know if you're familiar with the actor Dave Bautista. He was in
Yes, Guardian of the Galaxy, and
yes, but he is so much like one of your characters. When I was reading, I thought Dave Bautista should get this role,
I
and
think Dave would be perfect for Kowalski. He would make a
yes,
good Kowalski.
yes. So you heard it here first, folks. We're already
Okay.
casting the series. But let's go back. You were born in Chicago, is that correct?
I was. Yep.
And
I was born in Chicago. I was mostly raised in St. Louis.
okay. And did you have the talent or desire to write at an early age?
Oh, not at all. I mean, I knew from third grade that I wanted to be a veterinarian. I got that assignment you get in third grade where your elementary school teacher sends you home and says, write a couple paragraphs about what you want to be when you grow up. And I remember as a third grader, I had that blank sheet of paper in front of me. I knew I wanted to be a veterinarian. That's why I wanted to fill this essay out. The only problem was I didn't know how to spell it. So I thought I could put policeman, fireman, go out and play because I know how to spell that. But the one thing that third graders are loath to do, I walked over, got a dictionary out, looked up veterinarian so I could finish that little essay that Jim wants to be a veterinarian. So that was my career track. Love animals, love medicine, love science. but then that's this side of my brain. This side of my brain is more was weirder. I love to terrorize my younger brothers and sisters with wild stories. The more outlandish or fantastical, the better. If tears were involved, even better. And so there's that part of my personality that was a little bit of an innate storyteller. But I also was an avid reader, and I read a lot growing up, and that's like throwing gasoline on this side of the brain. If you're storytelling, you're reading, it just makes you want to tell more stories. It makes you want to maybe one day walk into a bookstore and see your book on a shelf. And I remember when I was young in Chicago, as a matter of fact, and also in Chatham, Ontario. My mom would take again, maybe this is why this brain is a little more twisted. I have 3 brothers and 3 sisters. We're a family of 7 kids, and to give her some peace of mind, I think every Saturday she would take us to the local library and she would let us loose. We had like she was an avid reader. I think, and she never told us we had to read, but she was taught by example. She read a lot. Which she'd drag us to the library, and I would just comb the shelves looking for my next great read. When I was young, I was addicted to these Danny Dunn scientific mysteries. As a young kid, no special powers, just a little bit on the smart side, that would get into these scientific strange X-Files like type of stories. I was just addicted to that series. And there was Alfred Hitchcock's 3 Investigators series, sort of a mystery-based series. Again, fascinated by that. So libraries are one thing that just kept me stoked, that kept me wanting to, one day walk into that library and see my own book on that shelf. But it didn't seem like a career track that I always thought at that time you had to have some type of literary background. Maybe you had to be the great grandchild of some type of, F. Scott Fitzgerald or something like that. You just couldn't, it just seemed like anybody could do, you could do this, this, and this, and you could become a veterinarian. You can do this, this, and this, and fail horribly as a writer. So it made more sense to become a veterinarian. But once I never, even in veterinary school, I dabbled with writing. I wrote some short fiction even in vet school. When I got out of vet school, I think was very busy. I started my own veterinary hospital. Life got even busier. But eventually I just couldn't stop listening to this side of the brain that was demanding that I tell stories. And so I wrote a bunch of short fiction for about 4 years. All short stories, and not a single one was published. It's now all buried in my backyard. Hopefully never see the light of day. But based upon that amount of success, I decided I'm going to write my first novel. And so I spent about 11 months writing my first novel.
Now,
that novel
were
sold,
you
another
going to
one
school all
sold.
during this time, or where
At
was
that
this?
time, had my veterinary hospital, so I was actually employed. I mean, I was working as a veterinarian, had my own business for
Which
15
is not
years.
I have to say, the people I know who are vets, that takes, that's not just, oh, I'm going to be a veterinarian. Here, you're a veterinarian. You've got all this
Oh
extra
yeah, there's
schooling you've
definitely a
got
career
to
track.
do.
It raised
It's a
it raised a
huge
lot of
commitment.
eyebrows.
Yeah.
My clients, began to get suspicious that something was wrong with Dr. Jim, mostly because they're like in the lobby of my veterinary hospital. There's a poster that said, "Okay, get your cat spayed, get a free book." And so they eventually were asking me questions across the exam table. They were like, "Dr. Jim, what's this writing business you're doing on the side? What's your long-term goal in life? You have a successful veterinary hospital. What's going on?" I said, well, for 15 years, veterinary medicine was my paycheck. That's how I earned a living. Writing was just a hobby. I wasn't making a whole lot of money off my first few books. It was mostly just fun to do. But I, thought, well, maybe down the line it would be fun to see those roles reverse and have, writing be my paycheck, the way I earn a living, and that veterinary medicine would be a hobby. And I always resent when people say former veterinarian, because I'm still licensed. I still do some volunteer work. I work with a group that traps feral cats, wild cats. They bring them to the shelter. And then for one Sunday a month, this is pre-COVID, unfortunately, I haven't done this for a year because of COVID sort of stopped all this from happening. And so I spend one Sunday, spaying and neutering cats about 8 hours. So as I jokingly say, all I do now with my veterinary degree is just remove genitalia. But it is a hobby. So at this point, I have achieved that goal I was aiming for. Veterinary medicine is just a hobby now, and writing is my paycheck.
So you wrote the short stories, and then you decided to write the book. And did you have any connections in the publishing world that you could
Nope,
take advantage of?
not at all.
You're just
I
out there.
just
Hey,
began cold sending it out, sending it over as I said, over the transom to different. It was rejected. My first book was rejected by 49 different agents. It was a 50th agent who finally saw something in that diamond in the rough. That was my first book, and believed that she could find a home for it, and she did. So I was lucky enough to see my first book that I wrote get published.
okay.
I worked with Lissa. It was definitely a diamond in the rough. There was a lot of editing, a lot of coaching, a lot of massaging to get that book into its current form that got published. Uh, but yeah, so it
Well,
was
now
definitely took a while.
did did you stay with that same publisher for your second book, or did you?
Yeah, I'm with the same publisher, same editor from the first book to this current book. So
Boy,
it's been with
that is unusual.
it is unusual. There's a lot of personnel changes in the publishing industry. There's a lot of shifting of authors to different publishing houses. But I've been with HarperCollins / William Morrow for since the beginning of my career.
Your real name is James, and I'm not going to butcher your last
So
name.
that's why. Yeah, my last name is pronounced Tchaikovsky. Just if you look at the little spelling, you would never guess that. Even on
And
the door to my veterinary hospital, I put Dr. Jim in quotes so that people wouldn't even bother trying to use my last name. And when I sold that first book, they were like, "We like the book, but that name's got to go. We need something phonetically pronounceable." And so Rollins is a pen name. Rollins came about because the University of Missouri Veterinary Hospital, where I went to school, is on Rollins Avenue. So it's a little nod to my Missouri
there we
roots.
go. We
Is
got
my
a little
pen name.
inside information there as to how the
Exactly.
name came up. So, how many books were you in before you started the Sigma series?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm guessing probably like at least a dozen books prior to beginning the Sigma Force universe. Because right now I'm working on my 40th book right now. So
And
it's I went
is
in.
it
It's
another Sigma book, or is it a different?
I finished up a book that's a second book in a fantasy series. That's again my little other book of the year, and then I'm working on the next Sigma book right now, which deals with takes place in Australia. It deals with Aboriginal mythology and early the colonial area of Australia. Plays an important role in the history part of the story, but also deals with sort of a treasure hunt around the globe for an artifact that might prove that we are not alone in the universe. So
Whoa!
that's the next Sigma books after this
Again,
one. So
timely, 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 with all the
exactly.
information being released. But
Yeah, I've got some surprising information for people.
Jim, in Kingdom of Bones, which is what I just read, there's
Yep.
the scientific element to it, which is
Yep.
amazing. When I was reading, I thought, gosh, how does this man know all this stuff? But there's also a mystical element to it.
Yep.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
you,
I'm always like I said, looking for that historical mystery. I'm looking for those pieces of history that have vanished or become either mythic or legendary. And so, in that idea box, as I was telling you about, I had a folder concerning a figure from history called Presterjohn. Now, Presterjohn is considered to be this again is a little fuzzy on exactly when he may have existed in Africa, 10th, 11th, 12th century. He was a black Christian king who ruled over a vast empire in Central Africa. His kingdom was said to be of astronomical wealth. His legend is tied to the Fountain of Youth, to the Ark of the Covenant, even to King Solomon's mine. Uh, European kings, popes were sending emissaries to Africa to try to make contact with this king. Most of those that went to Africa vanished, were never seen again. A few returned and said, nope, we couldn't find them. But a few Portuguese explorers came back and said, yep, we found them, and here's gold to prove it. But over time, he sort of disappeared into history. No one else could seem to make contact with his kingdom. Historians today now believe that Presterjohn is probably more legend than a historical figure. But me being a fiction writer, I'm always thinking a lot of these stories, especially stories that persist for centuries, there must be a kernel of truth to them, some seed that started that legend. And it makes me wonder, like, what did those Portuguese explorers that came back and said, "Yeah, we found him," none of that had gold to prove it. What was behind that? Why were they bringing gold out and claiming they met a king if they never had? So to me, that just sort of supports that maybe there was something really going on in Central Africa that just sort of vanished in the mists of time. And so my story sort of shines light on what might have happened to the lost kingdom of Presterjohn.
And you plant the seeds so well in the book, right at the start, and then it moves on and moves on and moves on.
Yeah, I like I like story. I like, playing with stories where things in the past have real world implications today. Because there's that old phrase, if we don't learn from our past, we're due to repeat ourselves.
Right.
So, I like the fact that history has a lot to teach us. Things happen in the past do have an impact today.
But there's things you did. There's a scientific element to it and everything, but you have a knowledge of guns. I mean, the type of I mean, and then helicopters and all this different stuff. How do you just assimilate all that?
Well, I've got I love doing my research. I try to make sure my details are correct as much as I can. Um,
Do you have a
but
research
obviously,
assistant, or do you do it all yourself?
I do it all myself
Ugh.
for a couple of different reasons. Is that I'm impatient. First of all, if I sent somebody to look for something, I want to know the information right away. And second is that if I had sent a research assistant to find some detail, some fact that I needed, they would have just gone out and come back with that fact for me. But what I discovered over my years of writing is that when I search for the answer to that fact, I discover many more interesting things on the way to that. Things that I would have never discovered if I just sent that research assistant out to get the information that sends me on a different track in the story, or maybe it's something so startling that I'm no longer interested in the fact that I was even looking for. So to me, a lot of the discovery and joy of writing is those surprises, either the surprises in research or surprising ways stories will twist and turn in ways I wasn't expecting when I first sat down. So to me, that's one of the fun parts of writing is uncovering and stumbling upon these wonderful little twists and turns.
Well, your research is evident in every aspect of your book.
Well, like I said, I do love to research, but I'm also a bit of a lazy researcher in that I always prefer if someone can tell me something versus me having to look it up. Early on in my career, back when I was doing my research for my first novel back in 1997, it got published, but I was writing it in 95 and 96. And this was with, pre-internet. There really wasn't a great resource online for looking things up. So I went to the Sacramento Public Library, the downtown branch, and had a relationship with one of the librarians there. And, she was wonderful at, directing me towards books that, would be important for my research. That first book takes place underneath the continent of Antarctica. I've never been to Antarctica, so I needed a lot of research for that. Again, this is my first book, so I didn't know a lot about guns, and so she directed me to the proper books. So the librarian was essential on getting my career off the ground. And so I always like either having someone tell me the information or direct me a little bit more specifically, rather than me just wandering trying to find it myself. Especially when it comes to the science. The science changes very rapidly, and book publication is slow. From the time I get my idea to I write the book to the book gets edited, and then the lag time between then and when the book gets published could be a couple of years. And so the science can change over those 2 years because science changes so rapidly. So when I'm talking to a scientist, let's say the virologist for this book, I'm not going to ask them, tell me what you're going to write in your next book or next periodical that's going to come out in 6 months to a year. Look over your shoulder, tell me what's on your lab table right now, because I need that immediacy so that when my book comes out, that the information is still accurate, still current, still topical. A lot of people say, "Hey, Jim, how come you knew about this? And then 6 months after I read your book, I was here, reading articles about that very subject matter. Well, that's because I was talking to the scientists, before they were ready to really release that information. So it's been fun sort of getting a jump on that, both from making sure my books stay accurate and current, but also it makes me look sometimes like I'm a little prophetic with my writing.
It does. I will second that opinion. It really does. When I'm trying to phrase the question in my mind,
Sure.
being an author takes a huge amount of time. I mean, you're doing 2 books a year. You've got the Dr. Jim veterinary clinic, but you and I correspond just a little bit. You mentioned something about
Sure.
caving.
Yeah, I mean, again, writing is a very solitary, very sedentary
Right.
job. So, back in college, I got sort of, I went to University of Missouri, as I mentioned before, and Missouri is sort of cave central, a lot of wild caves throughout Missouri. And so while a lot of my classmates were, doing float trips with kegs of beer or, flats of beer, I joined a caving club. And so that's when I sort of first learned about caving and learned to rope work. And I loved it, because to me, caving was a way of potentially seeing something that no one else on earth has ever seen before, because we weren't going through showcase. We were looking for those wild caves that were unexplored. And oftentimes we were discovering new chambers. So theoretically, a lot of things that we were setting our eyes upon, no one had set their eyes upon before. So to me, that was just thrilling. Also, it's physically taxing. It requires a little technical expertise. It requires some physical prowess. So that was fun. So
Now you're
when I
talking about
moved to the West Coast,
this isn't just walk into a cave that's there. You're up top
we were trumping onto
and
exactly.
dropping
They
down
were
into caves.
a lot of the there's the caving clubs are broken up into things called grottos, and so each grotto sort of knows where the wild caves are in certain areas. So sometimes around people's private property, you get permission to to venture into these caves. They're unmarked, unmapped for the most part. A lot of the caverns or caving systems have like a log book at the bottom of the caving system where you can record your name to prove that you made it all the way down there. So it's just a great deal of fun. So I still do that today. I mean, I'm still trying to keep myself in shape. I still do try to, being that again, writing is a very sedentary job. I try to physically get out there, whether it's hiking, whether it's kayaking, whether it's going caving on one of the trips. Try to stay as much as I can, physically active.
How deep into the earth have you gone?
I would probably say maybe 15, 16 stories, I think, underground.
Woo!
Is that the deepest one I've been into before?
I can't imagine.
It
Mm.
was challenging. It was
Any
good.
risky moments?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've been stuck in shoots before. So
Oh,
when I wrote Subterranean, my first book, it deals with the elevator pitch for Subterranean is I'm going to take 5 characters, drop them 2 miles underneath the earth, throw in some monsters, and then shake. That was my detailed outline for Subterranean. Because I was passionate about caving, and I always tell whenever I teach writing, I tell people you should be writing from a point of passion. And so I love caving. So my first book is basically a big caving book. It's all about caving. And so it was fun to put my characters through an adventure that was more daunting than anything I could imagine. So it was a great deal of fun to do that.
well, I'm sure with all your real life experiences, that just gives you a jumping off point to your imagination to go wild.
Well, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
You definitely got a sense of one of the characters has claustrophobia in Subterranean. And I don't really experience claustrophobia. It's not a good condition to have if you're a caver.
No.
But one of those times I got stuck, as you were asking before, I experienced that momentary panic of, tons of rock overhead pressing down on me, and I'm stuck in this chamber, and my buddies are like, yeah, you got to
Well,
wiggle yourself out of there because we can't help you. Either you get out or you're stuck. So
In
eventually, I think
Kingdom
mostly just from pure amount of sweat and grease
of
of being so scared, I eventually lubricated enough to get out of that hole.
Ugh. But in Kingdom of Bones, there's a scene where they go through a cave or tight
Yeah, I
spots.
mean, there's a lot of caving, there's a lot of diving because when I came to the West Coast, I took up scuba diving. So again, a lot of my hobbies end up in my book, but also because I need to hide things on this planet, these historical mysteries, these things that have been hidden for ages, and being the fact that the world is so geo mapped and everything is, you can go on Google Earth and check every square inch of the planet. I've got to hide things, and so caves are a good place for me to hide things that I need to reveal in the course of a book.
Well, I was trying to read some of the comments that people are making as we're talking, and they're just fascinated by this stuff that you're telling, which I am too. I'm in awe. I'm not much of an adventurer at all, so uh, hearing you tell these things is really wild. You also mentioned that you work with veterans organizations.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that. 'Cause I like to support the veterans out there. Um, I had done various charity work for veterans, but when I went to did a USO tour of authors to Iraq and Kuwait in the
I
winter
didn't
of
know there was such a
2010.
thing.
We were the first. We were a test balloon. They never sent authors out into the field. So we went to like a dozen different bases in Iraq and Kuwait, and they were like, "We're not sure who's going to want to see you," but surprisingly, they were very enthusiastic. They were
I'm
very
sure they were. Who all went?
thrilled to see us. And a lot of servicemen and women have they have these big pockets in their pants, and they a lot of times have a paperback stuffed in there.
Hmm.
So a lot of avid readers out there. But again, seeing the hardship that they were under, I knew I definitely wanted to try to get out there and help them when I got back, and I wanted it in a more organized fashion. I was approached by an organization called USA Cares. You can visit them at usacares.org. They raise emergency funds for vets in need, whether it's to help with a mortgage payment, whether it's to help with travel expenses. It's not a loan; it's just money in their pocket. And the organization is very efficient at raising funds. For every dollar they raise, 98 cents ends up in the pocket of a vet. And so they achieve such efficiency by looking for spokespeople to talk about the organization and direct veterans or people that are willing to donate funds. So if you go to usacares.org, great organization. I also belong to US for Warriors. It's a grassroots effort out of San Diego. Besides doing social welfare activities for veterans in the local area, they're now doing sort of a mentorship, trying to get veterans to tell their stories, whether it's through with the goal of getting published, which they've had some success with, or
That's
whether
great.
it's to produce a testament that they can share with their family,
And
or
it's also
and oftentimes it's to
therapeutic.
get it out of their head. It's
Yeah,
good. It's good therapy to get what's in their head onto paper.
and I'm sure there are just some amazing stories that they bring back also. That's
Oh yeah,
great.
definitely.
Yeah.
It's best to capture those stories before these histories are lost in the fogs of war. Is that there's many important stories that are kept within a family or that are kept within the head of a veteran that they don't share that I think are important to share. And so it's a great new program.
Well, that's super of you to do that. That's you know
Oh, I'm
great.
happy to do it. I mean, it's just I'm honored to be able to even offer
And
any
we also
assistance.
want to mention that we are sponsored by or promoting libraries with this
Yep,
interview, and libraries have always been important to me. When my wife and I, whenever we move, first thing we do is check out the library for our kids, that
exactly.
that type of thing. So, and in all of our conversation tonight, libraries have come into your story at various points. So we support
Yeah,
the
one of my
library.
we definitely do. Again, besides having veterinarian on that list of things I want to be when I grow up, I thought one of the coolest jobs is to be somebody that drives the bookmobile.
Wouldn't that be
Those
great?
little vans, because I can just think you just go somewhere and you can just sit there, read all day, and then you drive somewhere else and you read all day. Sounds like a perfect job.
You know, independent booksellers are amazing. I'm not. taking away from the chains or anything else, but independent booksellers where you can just go in and have
Definitely.
a conversation with somebody. What books have you read lately? What books are you recommending? That type of thing. I love that. Yeah, I really do.
Yeah, I mean, independent bookstores are so lifeblood of this industry. That's where you get the people that are enthusiastic and passionate about the subject matter. And what I love is that you know, they're informed about, if you have a certain type of book, say, hey, I like this book. Can you recommend another book like that? And it's hard nowadays, especially on Amazon, to really find that type of thread. It takes
Right.
somebody that's in the industry to really understand, okay, if you like that book, I know another book you're going to like. And it really takes somebody in the independent bookstore to be able to direct you appropriately.
Well, I know, in my life that uh, just going and talking to independent booksellers just gave me such insight into books that I never would have picked up on my own, you know,
Right.
because you can't
I
know
mean, that's the
about.
problem is that it's hard to you can go to like in a bookstore and look at the new science fiction fantasy section or the new mystery section, and you can look there, but you know it's uh it's hit and miss on having any success. Whereas having somebody that's getting feedback from readers saying, "Hey, this book I just read was really cool," and they make a note of it, and so when someone else is saying, "Hey, I'm looking for something in that genre," say, "Hey, somebody just came in and said this is a great book." It takes that human connection to really get books into their proper hands.
Yeah, you're a well-known author, but how do you communicate with your fans? Do you have a web page where they can comment or?
Oh yeah, I mean, I remember early on in my career, I was one of the again back in '97. Not a lot of authors had websites, and so I was cutting edge in that I had a website. And I still
Yay,
have that same website. It's jamesrollins.com. I always describe it as
you
sort of
are
the
consistent.
encyclopedia. I try to be, and it's sort of the encyclopedia of James Rollins. If you want to know about the books, if you want to know the section on how to write, it's what I've learned, teaching myself how to write. So some tools of the craft you can learn from the site. But I'm also on all the different social media. I remember when Facebook was first appearing early in my career. I contacted my publisher and said, "Hey, I'm looking at this Facebook. This Facebook is really intriguing. I think it's a great way for me of reaching audiences. And can you help, guide me maybe through this a little bit?" And they were like, Facebook, it's a flash in the pan. Don't bother with it.
Don't worry.
But I ignored them and I went on, I became very active in social media very early on. So, but I like what Facebook is. You have that immediacy of a relationship with your readership that you couldn't get through email or with websites. Oftentimes I'll test things through social media. A couple books ago, I offered a couple different options on titles and put it out there to see what rang the strongest bell. One point, I had a character whose fate was up in the air, and I sort of left it to the social media crowd to tell me, which way they think that dice should roll, and if so, how and why. So I like being able to bounce these ideas off of the readership through social
I'm
media. So it's a
sure
great
that
deal of fun.
that your fans love that, thinking that they have
Well, I love
something.
that. It's useful for information for me.
Yeah, that's
I like
great
to get their
though, that
feedback.
communication, that being able to have that feedback and have that involvement. I'm sure they love, you know, being
I mean,
involved.
it's great. I mean, I think at this point, if it wasn't for social media, I probably could get a third book done every year. But it's still well worth the time to invest in keeping that open line of communication.
Yeah. If I'm involved in social media too, and people say, well, that's nothing. No, if you keep up with all your social media, you're taking a chunk of time to spend
Yep.
on it. You know, well, you're a successful writer. You've got your clinic. You've got your support of the veterans organizations. Any goals still left to do?
Anything else I want to do? I mean, most of my goals are more, trips I'd like to take, other places of the world I haven't seen. I still, to this date, have not been to Antarctica yet. That's the only continent I haven't set foot on. So that is one of my goals is to get out there, especially after 2 years of being confined, not being able to travel too much. I'm looking forward to getting out there and visiting people again out in the rest of the world. I mean, what I like, again, for a lot of my ideas that end up in an idea box is from my travels. Is I will go someplace and I will learn something. I'll walk up to somebody in a small town and I'll say, "Hey, tell me something that nobody knows about this place. Tell me a secret that no one is familiar with." And surprisingly, I don't know, it's just the anonymity of the situation that they will sometimes tell you surprising things, and oftentimes that becomes the seed for a story. So I'm anxious to be able to get out there again and see more of the world again.
With all of that travel, Jim, any favorite places? Any place that you go back to repeatedly? Or
Yeah, I think one of my, again, maybe it's just the veterinarian in me. I mean, I do like visiting, the big cities of Europe and getting the history that's richly embedded in there. But I liked going to the natural world the most. I like going when I went to the rainforest in Brazil, or I went to Tanzania. Uh, that became sort of the idea for writing a jungle epic. I like going to the places that have sort of a natural element to them. So one of my bucket list items, I've never been to the Galapagos Islands. That's another place I'd love to go to.
do you when you go, do you stay for a long period of time, or is it just short trips, or
Oh,
do
it
you actually?
varies. When I went to Tanzania, I was working with a group of veterinarians that were doing research on injured Western mountain gorillas. So that became the impetus to put a Western mountain gorilla in one of my books. So Baco appeared in The Bone Labyrinth. But even that book wasn't a big jungle epic. It was a different type of story. But I knew I wanted to do the jungle epic after being in Tanzania. So that was a decade ago, I think, since I was in Tanzania. And only now am I writing my big jungle epic. So it takes a while for sometimes
Sure.
my journey to lead to a book.
As we get to the end of this conversation, who does James Rollins read when he just wants to read?
I read a lot of the things a lot of books I've been reading all along. When I was growing up, I was reading a bunch of different genres. I was reading science fiction and fantasy and thrillers and mysteries and war novels, James Michener novels. I like everything. So even when I write, it's a mixture of a lot of different things. There's history, there's exotic location, there's weird science, there's some fantastical elements to the story. So it's a blend of everything I love to read. And I still read a lot of the same authors that I grew up reading. Sadly, Clive Cussler passed away, but he was a big influence on my writing.
I
Michael
didn't
Crichton
catch
also
that.
passed
Who did you
away.
say?
Clive Cussler. Clive
Oh,
Cussler
yeah,
was a big influence.
yeah.
Tom Clancy, Michael Crichton. They've all passed away. So now I'm looking for that next level of writers, whether it's Mark Graney, whether it's Brad Thor for military thrillers, whether it's Naomi Novik for fantasy. So there's a whole new exciting things occurring in all the genres. People trying new things, which I find things very exciting. Whenever I teach writing, I always tell people, you need to write every day. You need to practice your craft, but you should be reading every night. You need to sort of know what's happening in a genre. You need to know what feels stale, what feels new, so that if you're going to write in that genre, what you're writing is not going to feel old-fashioned or stale or out of date. So there's exciting stuff occurring in every genre. There's new things people are doing with mysteries. There's new things that are doing with horror novels. So I love to read deeply. One of my favorite authors is a gentleman named Dan Simmons. Um, he writes in a bunch of different genres, which I sort of am envious of. He wins awards in whatever genre he writes in. He writes science fiction, he wins the Hugo Award. He writes a mystery, he wins the Edgar Award. He writes a horror novel, he gets the horror award for that year. So I'm envious of his ability. He's the chameleon that he is, to be able to shift into genre so smoothly and so well. So I'm somewhat enamored of his work.
And that's great. But I have seen authors who have tried to go into different genres, and the fans would not allow it.
That's true.
They
I mean,
want
and
you
I've wandered
pigeonholed.
over to fantasy a little bit, and I just I think at this point I have a tendency to stray from the path a lot. So a lot of my readership is willing to follow me in those other paths, and if they don't want to, that's fine too. But oftentimes when you go a different path, you're going to discover new readers also. So I don't discourage people from trying that. And like I said, always encourage writers when they're writing is you have to write from a point of passion. I mentioned that before. And so if I get an idea in my head for a story, if I get excited about that idea, it's hard to let it go. I find that unless I write that story, it's just going to be a thorn. It's going to be always sort of the little voice at the back of your head demanding to be told. So like I said, I wrote my first book in a fantasy series because there's a story I've been working on for almost 7 years, based upon a scientific article that got me thinking about the weird biology, weird evolutionary history of that planet. And it kept snowballing. Eventually, I just, I had to tell that story. It was just going to drive me crazy.
A question that I never thought about, but I've learned talking to different authors. Do you outline or do you just write and let it evolve?
For me personally, it's occasionally I go to writers conferences, and there's usually a panel that's about the process of writing, and usually there's the heavy outliners that will outline everything to a great degree, and then there's the seat of the pants writers, who just don't know any story. They just sit down and they write. And usually by the end of that panel, they're in a fist fight because their brains are wired so differently. For me, I'm somewhere right in the middle. I know the beginning, I know the end really well. I know the 3 or 4 tent poles that are going to hold up that story, but I don't know how A connects to B connects to C necessarily. To me, as I mentioned before, the joy of writing is that discovery between those tent poles, the twists and turns of the story, a character that I thought was going to be a minor character that becomes more prominent. I only discover that when I'm writing, and to me, that's one of the joys of writing is that discovery process. So I don't want to overly outline my story. I also found that if I overly outline my story, if I know it to a T, then I'm a little bored with trying to write it because now the whole story is known in my head, and I'm afraid that if I'm bored with the story, that it's going to come off on the paper. So to me, I want that little bit of, working without, walking that tightrope without a net. I want a little bit of that terror that's involved in that, not quite knowing where the story is going to go.
I've talked to one author who told me that his outline was longer than his book, and I just can't
that
imagine.
Is true.
I can't imagine. And then I talked to other authors who said, like you said, see the pants. They'll say, I never know where the characters are going. They just go on their own. And I'm like you. I don't do that much writing, but I'd have to have tent poles to at least know.
I mean, especially not mine. I'm trying to build that roller coaster. I'm trying to get to the story that has sudden drops and unexpected twists and turns. And for that to work, I've got to have a few nuts and bolts of that roller coaster in place. I need to lay a few of the tracks in place so that the story can get to where it needs to go to, but still have the final destination in mind. I need to know where I got to land the story.
Well, I'll tell you, Kingdom of Bones, it's a wild ride. You won't be bored. You better set aside some time if you're going to open the first page, because like I told you, it grabs you from the start. There's no, have a seat, relax, whatever. No, you're there and off and running. So I urge people to get this book and read it. They're going to be fascinated.
Thank you very much, Jackie. I appreciate that.
It's
very kind words.
And we want to say that, we urge people support your libraries, and we appreciate their participation in arranging for me to have this great chance to talk with you. So support your libraries out there. But Jim, you've been fascinating. I've learned a whole lot about you and enjoyed every bit that I learned. I hope those who tuned in enjoyed it as well. But thank you for taking your time, and thank you for being the author that you are.
Thank you very much, Jackie.
All right. Enjoyed it. This is Jackie K. Cooper.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.